I'm Frank Vaughn. It's November 5th, 2025, and I was busy last night tweeting away, even though we don't call it that anymore. We call it X posting. I was responding to the released budget plan for Canada coming out of the Carney government. Now, it's clear that Mark Carney hasn't listened to his own appointment at the Parliamentary Budget Office, because in his plan, he's talking about adding over $300 billion to the national debt at a time when our debt to GDP ratio just at the federal level is 109%. Recall, I talked about earlier how the EU, when they were thinking about designing the European Union, established a cutoff of a debt to GDP ratio of 60%. That all member states had to meet that. Now, granted, some member states are beyond that now, but it doesn't matter. The economists and the brain trust that came together to design the thing in the first place said 60% was a trigger warning. And then, when you actually look at debt to GDP ratio, when you get above 90%, you get to a point where every dollar that's created out of nothing, perpetual stock division of the currency, every dollar that's created out of nothing can no longer generate a return for itself once you're over 90%. We're already 109%. Carney's going to increase that to somewhere north of 130, 140%. I engaged in a bit of hyperbole last night, and we'll start there. The X post reads, "We really are witnessing the end of Canada. $500 billion in new debt and Bill C-3 are getting priced into our currency market in real time. It's so unbelievably bad." I do believe that the Canadian currency is going to test and probably break through its all-time lows, because you can't do this. You can't do this money out of nothing, creating money out of thin air, which, by the way, none of this new debt is going to Main Street. There was nothing in there for what Global News calls everyday Canadians, which I also took exception with last night, because what is an everyday Canadian? What does that mean? Is it just a nice way of saying plebs and tax slaves? Is that how they term us, everyday Canadian? The other one that I've never really been a fan of is consumer. And I don't mind the term consumer when economists use it, but I do mind it when the mainstream media and the news blares it at everybody, that it just boils everybody down to buyers, net buyers, and how much they're buying, how much useless crap they're buying. That's their worth. That's your character. That's the sum total of your value to society. But I digress. I said $500 billion in new debt. And some few people, it's incredible how few, because it's the one area, it's the one talking point that people could get me on. I've made it easy. Have rightly pointed out that nowhere in the budget does it say $500 billion. It adds up to $300 billion. But just like deficits have a tendency to increase over time, and government has a well-demonstrated tendency to understate how much they're overspending, my guess is by the time we get there, it'll be $500 billion. They'll find a way to do it, believe me, because Mark Carney believes, if you've read his book, which I have, he believes in the ultimate power of the money printer, like other people believe in God. And it's insane. There was an X post, and it was from a boomer, and they said, and this is in regards to Bill C-3. "Do you know why Bill C-3? Because Canada is aging rapidly and population is collapsing due to low birth rates," which is correct. "Soon there will not be enough young people to pay taxes for the old ones like us to have living. We are crashing, yet nobody is talking about it." Well, I talk about the birth rate crash, but I absolutely resent the notion that it is the responsible of the young generation to be tax slaves so that you can sit on your ass and collect a pension. Where were you people who were adults and taxpayers for the last 40 years while this country was sold off? And now you expect the indentured servitude of everybody else that lives here so that you can keep collecting your pension. It ain't going to work that way. Even if there was enough people to keep paying those taxes, this printing, this money printing, this government borrowing, these record deficits, this decline in the value of our economy is going to erase your purchasing power if it's held in Canadian dollars. And it doesn't matter what number of tax slaves you add to the nation. Now, what is Bill C-3? Bill C-3 just passed its second reading. This basically says that anybody that's here for 3 years, from wherever they come from in the world, a person could come here from India, they could spend 3 years here and obtain citizenship, and they could go back to India and never set foot in the country again. And all of their children and grandchildren that are created from that point forward who have never set foot in Canada will become Canadian citizens. This literally kicks the door wide open to the world. The entire world can now become a Canadian citizen with rights to access to our healthcare system, with the right of access to our education system, with the right of access to all of the various entitlements which are already bankrupting us. This is the so-called solution to the birth rate problem. We give citizenship to people who don't even live here. It's insane. I made a post last night and I said I could save myself a lot of time if I just live streamed a gigantic flashing red light, stitch in the emergency alert sound effect on loop, and just call the live stream Canada. But it wouldn't make a damn difference. And this is the problem, because the propaganda is so effective. I had somebody message me linking a global news article telling me to get educated, because I make the argument, the crazy argument, that Donald Trump is not responsible for the last 40 years of problems successive governments have created. It's a bipartisan statement. I'm not celebrating the Conservative Party here, the Progressive Conservatives before that. I'm not celebrating the Liberals. I'm not celebrating any of them. I'm not celebrating the NDP, who has propped up the Liberal Party. 40 years, we have been heading towards our dissolution and our destruction. Back when Donald Trump was still a loved celebrity filming The Apprentice. Donald Trump is not a new problem. But I just want to talk about global news really quick. I screen capped this last night. And it doesn't matter what it's about, but I'll read it anyway. Federal Budget 2025. Canada's opposition leaders criticize Carney government's spending plans. Look at the pictures they give you. Elizabeth May, Blanchett, the other guy. I'm just going to call him the other guy because who really cares? They're all wearing poppies. They all look nice and healthy. They got a healthy skin tone. And look at the picture they pick of Pierre Poilievre. He's pale, he's pasty. You can actually see from the way the lighting is right here that this picture is at least somewhat altered, or it was picked from an altered picture, but they picked this out. They make him look sick. He doesn't have a poppy on, so the implication is he's not patriotic. And this is what you get constantly from the mainstream media, the same mainstream media that's somebody from the left. And again, it's a middle-aged, single, white woman messaging me, telling me to get educated, saying that I am mansplaining, engaging in misandry as the basis of her response is that I'm some stupid man trying to explain things to a smart woman who doesn't need no man, as though my opinion has no value because it emanates from a man's mouth, and somehow she thinks that she is the voice of egalitarianism and equity and equality. It's crazy to me. But these people get their news from global news, which is why they think the Conservative Party of Canada is just set up to give the country away to Donald Trump, and nothing could be further from the truth. Poilievre, if your goal is the dissolution of Canada, Poilievre would slow the process down, not speed it up. There is high-level coordination between the Carney government and the United States, in spite of some limited public optics, when it comes to things like the Genius Act, which is going to regulate, basically, I think in a way it's going to try and turn Tether into central bank digital currency. It's going to be this hybridized thing. But anyway, there's mixed opinions on the Genius Act. But American regulations as regards stable coins, which are cryptocurrencies that are pegged to the value of the US dollar, our legislation is going to be completely aligned and compatible with US legislation. We're talking high-level coordination between the two nations. One could argue that this whole thing is just one PR facade where Mark Carney is here to manage Canada into subservience to other national interests. I've argued that before. not just the United States, but Europe and China, as he erodes our sovereignty, what little of it's left, even further. And these people think the Liberal Party is here to save the country. Nothing could be further from the truth. I'm not a Pierre Poilievre fanboy. I don't like the Conservative Party of Canada. That has been true for a very long time for me. And this is one of the reasons why. Another post I made last night. No election. I don't know if we're going to avoid an election. I don't know that. But I think the point is, whether we have an election or we don't have an election, the reality of Carney's mandate, I think, is already baked in. This guy's going to get a majority. He's going to get it one way or another. The Canadian public is going to hand it to him because they think they're saving Canada, even though he is here to literally destroy this place. Or, as a consequence of the Conservative Party of Canada catering to the center for all of these years, for being milquetoast for all of these years, being afraid to be bold, being afraid to actually lead, being afraid to assert themselves, they filled themselves up with wannabe liberals in the backbench. So you've already had one Conservative MP, so-called, quit the Conservative caucus and join up with the Liberal parties. They only need two more. Anyway, the post is, no election, just centrists leaving the CPC ship. Carney's mandate is a fait accompli from many angles. Canada is in managed decline. What are Alberta and Saskatchewan waiting for? We have to get out. I've seen an Alberta government minister basically, again, adopting the position that we just got to wait and see. We need more details from the budget before we can make a decision or take a position. It's like, the position's right there. The writing is on the wall. I covered on this channel how many of the bills that are advancing through Parliament right now are a noose around Western provincial necks. They're boxing us in to deny us leverage when eventually it becomes inevitable that we try to get away from Eastern Canada and their governance. 150 years of pain since before the Western areas were provinces, back when they were territories, all the way back to when Palliser identified as Triangle. We've been getting screwed. And I don't know how much longer it's going to take before we just take the position that we got to try the Quebec model. At the very least, we got to start with what Quebec has done so successfully, which is blackmailing the country by threatening to leave. I find it incredible that the budget was delivered by a French MP. It's just so symbolic of how this country functions. I don't know why the Western provinces have never tried to do something different. And I think inevitably they have to get there. They got to get there. This is like an open-air prison for anybody that wants to prosper and build. But anyway, back to the budget and this $300 billion of debt, which I think will end up being $500 billion by the time it's all said and done, will not produce revenue. Now, the only good thing to come out of it is there's going to be a clawback of the public service, which is maybe how they get these Conservative MPs to cross the floor. And I got to talk about that just for a second because, we've already got one that left. The Conservative for Louis Saint Laurent, which is in Quebec, Gerard Deltel, is a former Quebec Liberal, turned Conservative, quote unquote, is a vocal critic of Pierre Poilievre and his angry style, whatever the hell that means. If Poilievre was angry, that would be a blessing. But Poilievre isn't angry. He's rapidly turning more milquetoast as time goes by. And he supports the budget's NATO spending. This is a very soft Conservative, one of the ones that I would imagine the Liberal Party is targeting for floor crossing. If we can avoid an election by them getting two more MPs and giving them a majority, that's the path they will take. They clearly want the optics of a majority government, but I don't think they care how they get there. There's also Shelby Cramp Newman from Hastings, Lennox, and Addington, which is very near to my former stomping grounds. A so-called moderate rural voice, as expressed in the media. She has indicated frustration with Poilievre's tariff rhetoric and backs the housing investments in the budget. Is that enough to pull her across? I don't know. It's possible. There's Richard Martel, who's disagreed publicly with Poilievre's stance on trade diversification. He's very pro-Carney's Arctic Corridor Plan. There's Kathy McLeod from Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou, a veteran MP with centrist leaning and supports budget's critical minerals push despite resource sector concern. The conservative middle is very soft, which is really all anybody needs to keep in mind. There's a lot of different tools in the liberal and the big red machine's toolbox to gather together sufficient support for the majority government that I think they're destined to get. And the reason I think they're destined to get it is this country is so thoroughly propagandized in many regards. Those who aren't asleep, those who aren't just out of the political conversation, they just want to get on with their lives. There's a whole lot of people who just want to be left alone. That's fine. That's fine. And under normal circumstances, that would be perfectly fine. But the issue is these are not normal circumstances. The future's on the line. And wanting to be left alone is not sufficient. You've got to get involved. But they're probably not going to. And then there's the very large cohort of liberal support that is absolutely convinced Donald Trump is the enemy of the free people of Middle Earth. He's Sauron himself. He has been very successfully labeled as such and is now responsible for 40 years of Canadian decline. Every problem we've ever had, they lay at Donald Trump's feet. Just go look at the responses to my posts on X. Anything that achieves a degree of virality, I don't even know if I can call it viral, but anything that gets over 1,000 likes and a bunch of retweets, as soon as things start getting a little bit viral, they show up in droves, and they're not all bots. Now, they might be programmed by the bots. I think a lot of their words are fed to them by the bot campaign that is run by the big red machine. They also get their talking points from Global News. That's why they link me Global News and they tell me to get educated as though Global News is an education. They're very proud of themselves. They absolutely hate assertive men that actually will give their opinions. They're very proud of themselves. Many of them are wine drunk and just posting online. And this is, I think, an insurmountable hurdle. I don't think we can win an election at the federal level. And even if we did, even if we won, and when I say we's not even the right word, because I'm not overly excited about a Conservative Party majority. What difference would it make? Poilievre has basically adopted the same stance as Mark Carney vis-a-vis the United States. No one has Fortress North America as a vision. These are all globalists. They don't understand that the World Economic Forum model of running the earth and the United Nations model for running the earth, the IMF, the City of London, these things are being laid aside. China is not willing to live under the yoke of Europe. Neither is Russia. That's critically important. That's the future global order right there. And the United States understands this. The Trump administration understands this. And they're trying to reorganize the empire in a way that the Republic and Fortress North America can survive and prosper in a new multipolar order. And it's the only game in town. Everything else leads to subservience. And they're telling you, folks, they're telling us here in Canada, our government officials are telling us the truth. The Bank of Canada governor comes out and says that everybody's standard of living is going to take a permanent haircut. And these people just applaud. Carney comes out and says he's going to add $300 billion to the national debt without producing really anything for it. And they just applaud. The very public sector unions that voted for him to protect their jobs are now facing a 15% haircut at a minimum, and they just applaud. The propagandized hive mind of Canada will pivot to promoting the government no matter what the government does. I don't know how much, you see, this is the thing. This is the rock and the hard place we're caught between. They're convinced that Donald Trump is responsible for every single ill that plagues Canada. Donald Trump is going to be in office for another 3 years. So no matter what bad happens in Canada, no matter from what source, whatever facts, whatever figures you can put on the table, whatever proof, I've made hundreds of videos where I painstakingly have shown source documentation, numbers, math, everything else. None of it matters because you've got this icon, you've got this idol, Donald Trump, this anti-idol, that anything that goes wrong, they can successfully pin it to him. So even if it's a result of liberal malfeasance, even if it's a result of the corruption of this country, even if it's a result of the infiltration of all of our institutions by these World Economic Forum hitmen or by communist Chinese infiltrators who literally build police stations on our soil and openly brag about taking over our country and claim that they run the place, none of it matters because they've got this censure, they've got Donald Trump to blame. And their pride will not allow them to alter that position. So where does that leave us? Particularly in Western Canada. But where does it leave the millions who are stranded as islands of common sense, as refugees still living under the system that is Canada and the rest of the country? It leaves us with, I think, one option is what it's coming down to, and that is Saskatchewan and Alberta and anybody else that wants to come along, and I don't think there is anybody else. We got to take our ball, and we got to threaten to leave, and we got to start talking and thinking outside the box, because Canada is not going to let us prosper. They're not going to let us survive. They're not going to allow our identity to survive. And with Bill C-3, think about Bill C-3 and its implications. How many, from one or two people, a couple that's lived here for 3 years, that achieve citizenship, can then go on to have children and grandchildren and create a dozen additional Canadian citizens? This is like anchor babies on steroids. This is like unleashing the floodgates of chain migration. There will be nothing left of the Canadian identity. This beautiful memory that I have of the world that I grew up in the 80s and 90s is receding from my view. And I'm really fearful for my children's future. I'm Frank Vaughan. I'm going to go put snow tires on the car. I'll see you in the next one.